Let me at the outset say how moved and impressed I was with the sessions I had the opportunity to listen to before ours started, particularly the talk by Anya Ravi, which was so persuasive and so great. I'm also in full agreement with Dr. Rajesh Subramanian in his sentiments about rethinking borders, rethinking nationalisms, rethinking our concept of the other, of the enemy. Let me also say what a particular privilege it is to be sharing the ties with Jimon Jacob, who, as he gave you a sample of his journalistic, shall we say, caliber, he's a news hound. And this is a endangered species these days. Journalism is moving more and more into air-conditioned rooms and studios where people are holding forth for hours on end on what they think about the world. And the man who can smell a story, pursue a story relentlessly against all odds and break a story is a rarity, and therefore it's a distinct pleasure to share the podium with him. Let me also congratulate the initiative by the creative rebels, both very loaded, very significant words, creative and rebel. As we know, someone famously said that if you are not a revolutionary or a rebel when you are in your 30s or 20s, there must be something wrong with you. If you are still a revolutionary and a rebel when you are in your 50s or 60s, there is still something wrong with you. I hope that's not the case today, because the fact is, particularly I see a lot of women here, women become more revolutionary and more rebellious as they grow older because the iniquity they suffer, the injustice they suffer, the discrimination they suffer grows, and their awareness of it grows with age. And therefore, your sense of rebelliousness is actually commensurate with what you have to bear with, what you have to tolerate, what you have to suffer. Rebelliousness is not a transferred epithet. You don't become a rebel for the sake of being a rebel. You become a rebel because something affects you. Something affects your sense of justice. Something affects your existence. Something affects the existence, the dignity, the honor of your fellow beings. Something affects your environment. And you think this is not correct, you must fight against it, you must speak against it, you must move against it. It is not a fad, it is not a fashion. And I have no doubt that this initiative means business. I could get a sense of this when three of your organizers, including the moderator of this one, came to my house here and where I live when I'm in Trivandrum, and they were full of zeal. I think they came around 7:30 and we didn't know. Time passed, I think it was around 9:30 by the time they left. But they were full of zeal, and so I'm very happy to be in this forum. Let me get to the business of trying and putting the media, the fourth estate, into some kind of a frame for our discussion. When we speak about the media, we're obviously speaking about the news media, not media in the broad sense of the term, because media is a catch-all phrase. It covers cinema, it covers your outdoor hoardings, it covers advertising, it covers journalism. So we are talking about the news media. And the news media is what is characterized as the fourth estate. As you know, the fourth estate is a term which historically came because Edmund Burke, at some point in British history, was addressing the Parliament, and he spoke about the Lord's temporal, the Lord's spiritual, the commoners, and then he said, and he said there's also the fourth estate, which is the media. So journalism at some point in the old concept was something that talked about what is happening around us. It grew in the coffee houses of Europe and England. It grew because of journals that were written in longhand by the privileged classes, by the feudal lords, and they would circulate them about the price of crop, about the policy of a government on immigration, or about slave labor, and so on and so forth. It's a very middle class kind of concept. Journalism is really a middle class preoccupation, or even an upper class preoccupation, the way it started. Which is why in Marxism it's called the bourgeois press. The press is indeed bourgeois, by definition. But it is an important agency in society because it plays a crucial link between the people who are pursuing various occupations and those who govern them. It plays a very big agency role, a social agency role. There have been famous journalists, there have been famous newspapers, there are now channels. The form of journalism has changed. But the role of journalism has remained more or less the same. Although I can see that it is changing too. Today, we in the profession speak about journalism being at the crossroads. We are in a crisis, we say, in terms of journalism. So I would like to try and describe journalism to you in terms of understanding your context and representing the context to the people themselves. So this is the representative function of journalism, to represent what is happening around you. You need to represent it to the people themselves, to those who are living in the context, as well as to those who are in power, to those who may make policy decisions, who may make a change to the context that you are living in. There is then the transformative role of journalism. You not only represent. I think it is important for journalism to play the agency role of being a transformative agent. What can you do to change a situation which is not quite okay? Some journalists may argue that that is not part of my job. My job is only to say things, to call a spade, to expose things as they are. But until and unless you also point a way to the transformation, I think journalism actually does not really fulfill itself. ഇവിടെ എന്നോട് മലയാളത്തിൽ കൂടി പറയാം, ഞാൻ മലയാളത്തിൽ പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ ഉദ്ദേശിച്ചതെല്ലാം വരില്ല, അതുകൊണ്ട് ഞാൻ മിക്കവാറും ഇംഗ്ലീഷിൽ തന്നെയായിരിക്കും പറയുന്നത്. In journalism, when you try to understand your context, if you look at this in terms of the Indian system, for instance, there are four, I think, methods of cognition, of understanding. One is what we call pratyakshamayad. നമ്മുടെ മുമ്പിൽ നമ്മൾ കാണുന്ന അനീതികൾ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ നടക്കുന്ന കാര്യങ്ങൾ, വളരെ പ്രത്യക്ഷമായി കാണുന്ന കാര്യങ്ങൾ. ദി സെക്കൻഡ് ഈസ് അനുമാനം, അനുമാനിച്ചെടുക്കുന്നത്. നമ്മളത് പ്രത്യക്ഷമല്ലാത്തത്, കാരണം നമുക്കത് വ്യാഖ്യാനിക്കാവുന്നതാണ്, നമുക്കത് മനസ്സിലാക്കാവുന്നതാണ്. We can kind of infer, from what is available, that this must be the reason. So the skill of inference is very important. മൂന്നാമത്തെ ആപ്തവാക്യം. In the old Sanskrit tradition, they call it Aptavakya. Aptavakya is actually the report of somebody who was present. The report of somebody who was watching the battle, recounting it to Dhritarashtra, whoever it is in the Mahabharata. This is what happened on the battlefield. Aptavakya. The reporter, the role of the reporter. And the fourth is Smriti. Smriti is memory. Without Smriti, you cannot connect up any of these three. But one of the interesting features of journalism today is that because journalism and the fourth estate has become so dominant in our lives, it has become so overpowering in our lives, that what is obvious is not something we can recognize unless the journalist tells us so. That is why I'm saying the representative function is so important that the represented almost becomes the real. The represented takes on the role of the real. We have got so used to the media, we have got so used to being mediatized, so used to the media, that if it hasn't happened on television, it hasn't happened. If it hasn't come in a newspaper, it hasn't happened, because I am no wiser for it. I do not know. And this whole reliance, this whole dependency on journalism has, I think, eroded the sovereignty of our lives, the sovereignty of our independent thinking. We have become kind of ഒരു മയക്കുമരുന്ന് പോലെയാണ് ഇപ്പോൾ. ഇത് മാധ്യമത്തിൽ വന്നില്ലെങ്കിൽ നമുക്ക് വിശ്വസിക്കാൻ വിഷമമാണ്. അത് നിങ്ങൾ പറയുന്നത് ശരിയാണ്, പക്ഷെ അത് പത്രത്തിലൊന്നും കണ്ടില്ലല്ലോ, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ടെലിവിഷനിൽ വന്നില്ലല്ലോ. നേരിട്ട് കാണുന്നത് പോലും വിശ്വസിക്കാൻ നമുക്ക് ബുദ്ധിമുട്ടുണ്ട്, മടിയുണ്ട്. കാരണം ഇത് മാധ്യമങ്ങൾ പറഞ്ഞിട്ടില്ല, മാധ്യമങ്ങളിൽ വന്നിട്ടില്ല. So this is a peculiar situation, crisis of the media, of our dependence on the media today. How the represented becomes the real. In Kalidasa's Shakuntalam, there is a wonderful verse which says, where King Dushyanta, Shakuntalam's katha ellarkum ariyalo, Dushyantan, മറവി, അദ്ദേഹത്തിന് ഓർമ്മയില്ല, നമ്മൾ അൽസൈമേഴ്സ് amnesia എന്നൊക്കെ പറയാം ഇന്നത്തെ ഇതില്. But then he says in Shakuntalam, and this has been translated, it's an approximate, not a literal translation. It says, my mind is taking strange turns. Like the elephant that passes before me, I cannot recognize the elephant. But after the elephant is passed, I see the footprints of the elephant and say, these are the footprints of an elephant. Therefore, that thing which passed before me, that beast which passed before me, must have been an elephant. So if there is an elephant in this room, we are all become such big dependent victims of the media that we will be hesitant to say this is an elephant. Let the media call it an elephant, then we will call it an elephant. We are losing our capacity to recognize what is obvious before us. പ്രത്യക്ഷമായത് തിരിച്ചറിയാനുള്ള കഴിവ് നമ്മൾ നഷ്ടപ്പെട്ടുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്നു. കാരണം ആ കഴിവ് നമ്മൾ മാധ്യമങ്ങളെ ഏൽപ്പിച്ചു കഴിഞ്ഞു. മാധ്യമങ്ങളാണ് ആ പ്രവൃത്തി നമുക്ക് വേണ്ടി ചെയ്യുന്നത്. So we will not recognize the elephant. But after the elephant has left the room, we will say, we will use, so our power of deduction or anumana may come into play. And we will say, these are the footprints of an elephant, so that may have been an elephant which went. So this is, I think, the indirect role of the media on our lives. That is how powerfully the media plays a role. And therefore, it is very important for us to be involved in the media, to take part in the media. The media is not a set of people sitting out there doing something and giving it to us, and we consume that or read it or view it and see how it affects our lives, because it is so powerful. We must start questioning the media. We must start thinking about the media, particularly the young people. I wonder whether some of you have thought about why is it that all the media give us the same set of news every day. How is it that news is organized in this manner? Who organized it? The Carnatic music, they say, was organized by Arya Kudi in a particular point, He said this, we'll start with this, we'll send this, and end with Mangalam. And it was structure on that. But who organized the media? How do we know that the headlines on the same day, channel after channel after channel, are the same? Newspaper banner headlines are also more or less the same. How does that happen? There must be some logic to it. It's not as if there's a 10 commandments by somebody, or Moses kind of person who's receiving 10 commandments every day. These are the headlines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if you switch channel after channel after channel, you'll find the headlines almost in the same order. So that if you actually switch, you can switch from channel one headline to next headline to third headline as you switch channels. It will be almost as scientific, as logical as that. How does this happen? That is because the media are thick as thieves. They are always comparing notes. They decide, they build the agenda, they set the agenda. Media practitioners build the agenda and set the agenda. And that becomes a news for us. That becomes a news we react to. That becomes a news we live our lives by. That becomes a news we, tailor our behavior to, make our opinions about, live our life. Imagine. And how does the media do this? The media does this because, paradoxically, if you actually examine it, if you actually think about it, because of the fear of missing the news. As in the newspaper or in a television channel, they have something called the editorial meeting. And in the editorial meeting, if the editor says, we missed this story, the editorial meeting, the editor will say, we story miss ചെയ്തു എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ അതിൻ്റെ അർത്ഥം എന്താണ്? ലോകത്തിൽ 1000-10,000 കാര്യങ്ങൾ നടക്കുന്നുണ്ട് ഒരു ദിവസം, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ലക്ഷം കാര്യങ്ങൾ നടക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. അതെല്ലാം നമ്മുടെ പത്രത്തിലോ ചാനലിലോ വരില്ലല്ലോ. എന്തുകൊണ്ട് ഈ 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 ഐറ്റംസ് മാത്രം നമ്മൾ കൈകാര്യം ചെയ്യുന്നു? എല്ലാ പത്രങ്ങളും ഒരേ ദിവസം കൈകാര്യം ചെയ്യുന്നു. കാരണം one of the reasons is because of fear of missing a news. അപ്പോൾ when I say my channel or my newspaper missed the news, what I mean is not that something out there in the world happened which I did not have in my channel or newspaper, but that I did not have in my channel or in my newspaper what another newspaper or another channel carried. So it's a purely relative concept. And for the journalist, the inference is if I am not to miss the news, I must carry the same story that others carry. And so you get this consensual concept of all news channels, all newspapers, more or less handling the same 30, 40, 50 stories. Of course, there's an occasional scoop or an exclusive. I'm not talking about that. But this is the way the news is driven. Paradoxically, the fear of missing a news drives everyone to do the same, agreed. So they are agreeing. It's a consensus. നമുക്ക് എല്ലാവർക്കും ഈ ന്യൂസ് മാത്രം ചെയ്യാം, വേറെ ആരും വേറെ ചെയ്തേക്കല്ല, then because that will become missing news for my channel എന്ന് പറയുന്നില്ല എന്ന് മാത്രം. But that is the thought process. And so you have a press club syndrome, people are comparing notes, and so you always get headlines on the same. This is how a particular practice has come into being. Practice of setting the media agenda has come into being, and the entire population, the entire people are believing that this is the construct of the world. കാരണം അതിനപ്പുറം നമുക്കൊന്നും മനസ്സിലാക്കാനുള്ള നമുക്കൊരു പോംവഴിയില്ലല്ലോ. നമ്മൾ നേരിട്ടുള്ള അനുഭവം അല്ലാതെ ലോകത്തെ പറ്റി നമ്മൾ മനസ്സിലാക്കുന്ന എല്ലാ മാധ്യമം മാത്രമാണ്. അപ്പം ഈ ഒരു പ്രതിസന്ധിയാണ്, ഈ ഒരു ഡയലമ. ദിസ് ഈസ് എ കൈൻഡ് ഓഫ് ഡയലമ ഓഫ് ദ റിലേഷൻഷിപ്പ് ബിറ്റ്വീൻ ദ മീഡിയ ആൻഡ് ദ പീപ്പിൾ. And therefore, I think the media is playing a far, far bigger role on our lives than we can even imagine. നമ്മളെ സൃഷ്ടിക്കുന്നില്ല എന്ന് മാത്രമേ ഉള്ളൂ, നമ്മൾ രൂപീകരിക്കുന്നതും നമ്മുടെ ആശയങ്ങൾ, നമ്മുടെ തീരുമാനങ്ങൾ, നമ്മുടെ ടേസ്റ്റ്, നമ്മുടെ ഒപ്പീനിയൻസ് ഒക്കെ രൂപീകരിക്കുന്നത് മാധ്യമങ്ങൾ തന്നെയാണ്. വളരെ പ്രത്യക്ഷമായിട്ട് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ വളരെ in a subtle manner. So this is a very, very important idea that you must. So the first challenge really is to understand this creature called the media, journalism, news media, the fourth estate. Enal now, because of modern technology, I think at last a liberative potential of the media is possible. Is before us, is at hand. Because of internet, because of the fact of social media, because of the concept, not in the fashionable sense of the term, of the citizen journalist. It is a fact that the media is no longer an ivory tower phenomenon. It cannot be an organization which is just producing the news and giving it to the people. Today we are talking about news being not just user-friendly. It went through a transition phase of being user-friendly to now being user-generated. We are talking about user-generated news. അപ്പോൾ തന്നെ നമുക്ക് കാര്യം മനസ്സിലായില്ല. In other words, news can be generated by the people who are actually reading, who are the beneficiaries or victims of the news, who are the consumers of the news in the market sense of the term. The news is generated by them, so it's user-generated media. പത്രക്കേ ഉള്ളൂ. So there is no larger great mind or a great philosophy or great sort of great knowledge or great exclusive understanding that was required to produce this. News is being produced by the people now, and the media is taking it because they've understood it, and also because the technology to capture news, to disseminate news has now become affordable, and access is so easy. With your mobile phone, you can capture images, and these become the breaking news. The first images of tsunami were not by professional journalists. They were by people who happened to be on the shore, who captured the tsunami on their mobile phones and sent it to television stations. The first images of the London underground bombings were only by people who happened to be there, not by professional journalists. The first images of, say, natural disasters in places like Haiti were by the people who were working there or by people who were living there. bloggers have become an important extension of news. Today, in fact, if you want to know what's happening in Iraq or places which are difficult for a journalist to go to, that's why the concept of embedded journalism came with the Iraq war. സ്വതന്ത്രമായിട്ട് നമുക്ക് പോകാൻ പറ്റാത്ത സാഹചര്യങ്ങളുണ്ടാകുന്നു. അപ്പോൾ we go with the army, with the police. അതിനൊക്കെ മാറ്റം വരുന്നുണ്ട് ഇപ്പോൾ. ഈ journalists normally, if they're covering a formal protest, for instance, or a war, you always are on the side of the in fact the side of the wrong person. സാധാരണ ഒരു street fightil, where do the journalists position themselves? They are not on the side. കല്ലെറിയുന്നവരുടെ കൂടെയല്ലല്ലോ ജേർണലിസ്റ്റ് നിൽക്കുന്നത്, പോലീസുകാരുടെ പിന്നല്ലേ നിൽക്കുന്നത്. ആ സംരക്ഷയില്ലാത്ത ജേർണലിസം ഇല്ലല്ലോ. അവിടെ നിന്ന് പ്രവർത്തിക്കുന്ന ജേർണലിസ്റ്റ് ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ ദാറ്റ് ഇസ് ഗ്രേറ്റ് ജേർണൽ. ബട്ട് ടുഡേ ഐ എം സേയിങ് സിറ്റിസൺ ജേർണലിസ്റ്റ് ആർ കല്ലെറിയുന്നവർ ചിലവർ പോയത് അതിനുശേഷം പോയി ബ്ലോഗ് ചെയ്യും, ഞാൻ കല്ലെറിഞ്ഞു. So that's an interesting concept of news. That's an interesting generation of news. An interesting perspective. അവിടെ നിന്നുള്ള ഒരു പെർസ്പെക്റ്റീവ് വരുന്നു, അവിടെ നിന്ന് വീക്ഷണം വരുന്നുണ്ട്. It's not a state-oriented വീക്ഷണം മാത്രമല്ല. It's a people-oriented, perspective. That is developing. So a counter perspective is developing. And that is becoming possible because of technology. Because of the reach of technology, because of the affordability of technology, and because of the huge impact of this technology. അതുകൊണ്ട് blogs, citizens journalism, മറ്റേ ഈ സോഷ്യൽ മീഡിയ. ഇപ്പോൾ ഇറാഖിലെ നിങ്ങൾ ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് ചാനൽസ് ഉണ്ട്, മിക്കവാറും ഇറാഖിലെ ഈ വെസ്റ്റേൺ റിപ്പോർട്ടേഴ്സൊക്കെ റിപ്പോർട്ട് ചെയ്യുന്നത് അവരുടെ പിന്നിൽ ഈ നമ്മുടെ തെങ്ങിൻ്റെ മണ്ടയോ മറ്റേ പാമ്പിൻ്റെ മണ്ട കാണാം. കാരണം അവരൊക്കെ അവർ 5-star ഹോട്ടലിൻ്റെ ടെറസിൻ്റെ മുകളിൽ നിന്നിട്ടാണ് റിപ്പോർട്ട് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. സാധാരണ നമ്മുടെ സ്ഥലത്ത് പോയാൽ യു മസ്റ്റ് ഗോ ടു ദ ഗ്രൗണ്ട് ആൻഡ് റിപ്പോർട്ട്. ടെറസിൻ്റെ മുകളിലാണെങ്കിൽ അവർ ന്യൂയോർക്കിൽ നിന്ന് ചെയ്താൽ പോരത്. Because they cannot go there. They cannot go to the streets. They cannot go to the bazaars. They cannot go to the locations because they'll be blown off or assassinated. So they are depending on the news for the local stringers, from the local bloggers, out of a nurse or a truck driver or a student in any street who is blogging. അതൊക്കെ ശേഖരിച്ച് അവരൊരു ന്യൂസ് ഉണ്ടാക്കുന്നു. അവർ വൈകുന്നേരം ആകുമ്പോൾ അവർ ടെറസിൽ പോയി നിന്ന് അവർ റിപ്പോർട്ട് ചെയ്യുന്നു. This is what is happening. So I'm just giving you an idea of what we are seeing every day, how the whole concept, the change of the news is taking place. So this, I think, is a huge, big difference in the way the media has changed. From a representative function, it has become a user-generated and a user, shall we say, centered function. നമുക്ക് ആവശ്യമുള്ള ന്യൂസ് നമ്മൾ തീരുമാനിക്കുന്നു. അത് ശരിയാണോ നമുക്ക് ചിലർക്ക് ചോദിക്കാം. മാധ്യമങ്ങൾ, പ്രൊഫഷണൽ ജേർണലിസ്റ്റ്, മെയിൻ സ്ട്രീം മീഡിയ will ask, but that you cannot create your own news. The news is, yes you can, because where is the news coming from? It is always created by somebody. It is created by me, now it's been created by you. What gives me the moral high ground to create news? It is a business. It is a middle class business. It helped to understand the world. It is a forum. It is a forum. That forum was initially the press. It became the television channel, now it's become the internet. Now it's a concentration of all that. As technological convergence moves, I think in a few years, in your single tablet in your hand, you will get your newspaper, you will get your television, you will get your radio, you will get your internet. And the newsprint may disappear. It's already disappeared, as the moderator hinted. In Western countries, many newspapers have closed down, not because of the revenue pattern, because they are not getting advertisements, because the whole movement is towards online, on internet. And I think they'll also eventually build up a environmental consciousness against the cutting of trees. After all, you need to cut something, some tree somewhere in order to have newsprint. And you may not be getting newsprint. If you're importing newsprint, that may not be available anymore, because newsprint may not be a viable business for countries even in the West, because there is no newspapers. Newspapers are closing down. So I think we will have to tail that. But the future is really into almost a different form of journalism. But the values of journalism, I think, will survive. The values of investigative journalism that Jimon Jacob spoke about will survive. Because that's where I think the professional will make then a difference. Not in terms of the daily diet of news that you get, but in terms of pursuing something to its logical conclusion on behalf of the people, from civil society and on behalf of the civil society, from the public sphere and on behalf of the public sphere, not from a professional ivory tower from which you give and others take. So this, I think, is the major shift that has taken place in news and news media, and this therefore affords tremendous opportunities, especially for youth, especially for creative rebels, to enter the fray, to intervene, to create instruments of news. themselves, about which we can probably discuss in the interaction phase. Thank you very much.